I think it's generally accepted that practical music exams are pretty terrifying, and one of the most terrifying elements of an already terrifying exam is the sight reading section. It's usually worth about 10% of the overall grade, and it's the one bit where you really can't bluff your way through. And to clarify, anyone who's ever done a piano exam might think they've bluff their way through, but as someone who's both done exams myself and read the examiner comments that come back from my students when they've done their exams, I can assure you there's literally nothing that escapes an examiner. You can get away with nothing. Anyhow, the way the sight reading section works is that you're given a piece of music appropriate to your grade and you have 30 seconds to prepare it. 30 seconds, half a minute. What in the name of Beethoven are you going to achieve in half a minute? Well, when I was a kid doing exams, the sight reading section was just unnecessary torture. I'd muddle through and hope that my pieces were strong enough to make up for the marks that I was surely losing in the sight reading. In my experience, teachers didn't really do very much to prepare you for it. They just assumed you could figure it out as you went. But when I look at the comment section of any video about how to pass the sight reading section in a music exam, the anxiety is so obvious. I see people of all ages putting themselves forward for exams, very brave, and feeling absolutely clueless about how to pass that one part. So it doesn't feel like very much has changed, unfortunately. So the purpose of this video isn't directly how to show you how to pass an exam, although if that's on the horizon for you, this will certainly help. It's more that I want to share with you how I train my students to use those 30 seconds, because you can then take that approach and use it as a framework, at a more leisurely pace for tackling any piece. Whether you just want to have a quick playthrough to get a sense of it, or you want to learn it in more depth. So I'm going to explain now how I have students use that half minute to maximum advantage, and then we'll apply it to some examples from the ABRSM sight reading exam preparation. So if we look at the grading criteria for the ABRSM as an example, and most exam boards would say something similar, the very first thing they list in terms of what they're looking for is fluent and rhythmically accurate playing. Rhythm is paramount. You can get away with a few wrong notes, but music played without rhythmic accuracy and fluency sounds wrong, even to the most unmusical listener. And to illustrate, I'm going to play part of a very well-known Christmas carol for you, but I'm going to deliberately mess up the rhythm. So see if you can recognize it. Here it is. Now I'm going to play it again with the correct rhythm, but a couple of wrong notes. It's much more recognizable with a few incorrect notes but the right rhythm than it is with 100% note accuracy but the wrong rhythm, isn't it? Because rhythm is much more important in music than notes. However, second on the ABRSM list is of course accurate notes and keys. So it's not like we can play any old thing with the right rhythm and get away with it. Keep in mind though that when you're playing through something for the first time, you're just trying to convey the sense of it. It doesn't have to be perfect. An occasional wrong note isn't the end of the world. The third area of interest is musical detail realised. So that's stuff like tempo, articulation, dynamics, pedal, any details like that. And finally, they look for a confident presentation. So that means not hesitating, not stopping and starting as you play, not going back to replay bits, and not correcting wrong notes as you go. So that's where your bluffing skills will come in useful. Okay, so when I'm preparing a student, I give them a checklist of things to do during their 30 seconds. And I do it knowing full well that in the pressure of the exam, half of it's going to go out of their head. So it's important to practice it as much as possible beforehand. So the very first thing you do when you're preparing to sight read something is to look at the rhythm. That's not negotiable, it's not a suggestion, it's what you need to do if you want to avoid turning Joy to the World into a descending one octave major scale. Most likely there'll be lots of bars where there's nothing too complicated happening, so what you're looking for is the bit where something is happening that could trip you up. So you're going to ignore the parts that are all, half notes and quarter notes, providing you can play those accurately without too much effort. And you're going to look for the places where there are 8th notes and 16th notes, dotted rhythms, ties, anything that might trip you up. Before you play a single note, you're going to figure out what that rhythm sounds like. So you can tap it, clap it, tap it on your legs, anything that will help you to hear that rhythm in your head. You also want to convey a sense of the time signature. So if you're around a grade 1 or 2 level, I'd definitely recommend using rhythm language to avoid getting confused between music that's in 2-time or 4-time and music that's in 3-time. So if you're trying to count 1, 2, 3 or 1, 2, 3, 4 in each bar, chances are you're going to get very confused very quickly and the rhythm will just break down completely. But you'll see how to approach that later when I run through a few examples. So once you've got a sense of the rhythm, the next step is to check the key signature. If you're around a grade 1 level, you'll only have a maximum 1 sharp or flat, if any. But as you go up through the grades, it becomes more complex. So you really do need to be familiar with key signatures and what they imply for the music you're playing. Basically, if you see a key signature, for example, with 3 flats, you need to know quickly what those notes are and how it affects the music that you're playing. Once you figure that out, you're going to scan the music to look for accidentals, and in the early grades, notice where the key signature sharps and flats are going to turn up. The third step then is to scan the shape of the music, and that's not trying to identify every single note, but noticing notes that you need to identify in advance, and noticing whether the music is moving by step or skip or up, down, repeated notes, and where the larger intervals are like fourths, fifths, octaves. If you watched my video about sight reading but stopped after Jibbity Face, I would recommend going back and watching the second half and getting to know how to identify intervals. It's a much easier way to read music, and it's very helpful in this kind of scenario. But it does have to be precise. If you misread a fourth as a third in the middle of a piece, then you risk having everything that follows it be out by a note. So you do still need to be aware of what the notes are. Generally speaking, you're aiming to consciously identify only those notes that you have to, the starting note in each hand and a note here or there that you can't easily identify by interval. But if you're spending regular time practicing rhythm and note reading, of course, none of this is going to be too much of an issue, right? Anyway, the fourth step is to get your hands into a good starting position, and in an exam situation, the music usually has a finger number over or under the first note in each hand so that you're in the right position to play the notes that are coming up. It stops you from bouncing around the keyboard. But if you're just doing this for yourself, you're going to need to look at the shape of the music over the first few bars and check out where the highest and lowest notes are. Make a decision about which fingers to place on the starting notes so that you can get off to the best start possible. So by now, if you were doing this in an actual exam, you've run out of time. You won't be able to think too much about dynamics and articulation and that kind of thing. But hopefully you'll have at least noticed them, and you'll be able to include maybe a little bit in your playing. Do try to spot the most obvious dynamics and notice if there are staccato notes anywhere. Every little detail you can add will lead to a better result. But that's your basic framework. If you're looking at more advanced music, the approach in an exam scenario is somewhat different, because you'd never have enough time to apply those steps that I've gone through here to 12 or 16 bars of music. In that case, you'd scan through the music and you'd pick out the main features. You'd look for changes in things like clef and time signatures and key signatures. You want to develop a keen eye for picking out the trickiest rhythmic twists and turns, and you're probably already fairly experienced at playing different styles like tango or ragtime that you might come across in a sight reading exam. On the other hand, if you're looking at more advanced music at home, you can definitely use these same steps before starting, because of course you're not constrained by time. Okay, so let's take some examples now and see how we can apply this framework. So looking at our first example is a grade 1 level piece. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the rhythm. So we're in 2/4 time, counting 2 beats in a bar. We've got a combination of mostly quarter notes and eighth notes. So we can use rhythm language for this. Ta for the quarter notes and TT for the eighth notes. So I'm just going to tap it. If you were doing an exam, you'd want to do this kind of quietly, or you could tap it on your knees, but it's easy to do it on the keys. So I'm just going to tap the right hand and left hand separately using each hand. So here we go. Ta, ti, 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 ta, ta, 2. Ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, 2. So now I've got a sense of what the rhythm is like. I'll just go do that very quickly once again. I now know where that rhythm is and what I need to think about. The danger sometimes is that we end up, if we're concentrating on the notes rather than the rhythm, that we would end up playing it all as quarter notes and forget there are any eighth notes present at all. So it's really important to feel that out in some embodied way, so that you know in advance what you're going to do. The next step then is to look at the key signature. In this case, I can see we've got an F sharp, so we're in the key of G, or possibly in E minor, but we can see that our first note is G and our final note is also G in the left hand, so that pretty much confirms that we're in the key of G. So we're going to have an F sharp. So I'm going to scan the music and have a look across and see where does that affect the music. And I can see there in the second bar, in the second measure, there's an F sharp there. So I need to be conscious of where that's coming in. If I look at the left hand, I can't see there's no Fs in the left hand, so I don't need to worry about that. But there is one in the right hand, so I need to keep that in my consciousness as I'm playing. So if I look at the shape of the music, then I can see that we're mostly moving up by step, and there's only in the left hand we have a skip between the first and second note. So we've got a third, we're jumping over a note there, that will be a line note. So skipping down from that, and then it steps all the way after that. The notes that I would need to really be sure of knowing in advance would just be the starting notes in each hand. So starting with a G in the right hand, and we're starting on a B in the left hand. So once I've got those two notes set up, it's pretty easy in this example to read the intervals. It's just steps and one skip. So I just need to be conscious of where we're changing direction though. So now I need to decide where I'm going to put my hands to begin with to make it easiest to play. Now if this was an exam, there would be a finger number in it. So I'm going to assume an E minor position actually works best for this one, because that allows me to go up as far as the B, which is the highest note in the right hand, but it also allows me to easily play that F sharp there in the left hand, in the second bar. In the left hand, that position also works very well. I've got my strongest fingers in place, 1, 2 and 3. I'm just taking into account the lowest and highest notes there. So now just a quick look at the other details in it. So we have a tempo marking, which is moderato, so that's not going to be too fast. And we have some dynamics to think about. We have starting mezzo forte in the right hand, and the left hand then playing piano. So it's a bonus if I can include some kind of dynamic contrast between the two hands. And both hands are playing legato, so there's a slur over the right and the left hand, so there's no staccato to worry about. Okay, so now I'm going to put my hands in position and I'm going to play through. So now looking at our grade 2 example, immediately when I look at it, I see the first couple of bars are fairly straightforward rhythmically. So I don't need to worry too much about the counting there. I can figure that out as I go along. So my eye straight away goes to bar 3 because I have some eighth notes there. So I might want to just tap out the eighth note to get a feel for those. So that would be ta, ti, ti, ta, ta. If I do that hands together, ta, ti, ti, ta, ta. I could do it on the notes. Ta, ti, ti, ta, ta. So it's good if I can to do it a couple of times, really get a sense of that. If you have more time to go through all of it, you can again just tap it out all the way through. Ta, 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 ti, ti, ta, 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 2. So you'll notice I'm always counting the most active hand. So even though on the right hand I might be, for example, in that last bar I'm holding, it's a whole note. So I'm not going to hold that as ta, 2, 3, 4. The left hand is more active, so I'm going to voice that one. So ta, 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 2. And doing that all the way through. So that can swap from hand to hand, whichever hand is more active. In this example, we've got 2 sharps in our key signature. So it's either going to be D major, or the relative minor 3 semitones below that, or 3 half tones below that, 1, 2, 3, which would be a B minor. But if we look at the very last bar of this piece, we can see that we're finishing on D, so that tells us that we're in the key of D major. As we scan through it, we can see that there aren't actually any C's in the entire piece, so we don't need to worry about playing a C sharp, but there are a number of F sharps that we need to think about. Only in the right hand though, the left hand doesn't have any F sharps, so we need to just keep an eye out for that one in the right hand. Because we're playing in a 5-finger position though in this one, if you get your third finger onto that note at the beginning, we're in a D position, and just keep it there, you'll play the right note. The danger is that your finger might decide to drift back down, you do still need to be aware of it. So now if we scan the shape of it, we can see that starting off in the right hand, we do have an interval of a third there. So we're skipping from the A down to the F sharp and back again. But after that, it's just up and down notes. It's just stepping up and down. Do be careful there in bar 3, we have a repeated note. Our F sharp plays twice there. That can trip people up, that can catch you out, not noticing that, or not expecting there to be a repeated note, and just sort of automatically playing the next note up or down rather than repeating that note. So do keep an eye out for repeated notes in any piece of music, that they really can cause trouble if you're not aware of them. The left hand is more interesting in terms of the intervals. We start off with an interval of a fifth, so we're going from the D to the A. You might recognize the shape of a fifth being, in this case, a line to a line with an empty line in between on the staff, and that, of course, on the piano then is just fits the hand nicely, isn't it? Because we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so we've got our thumb and little finger in place. In the second bar, then, though, we keep that A on top, and that's an interesting thing to note, that for most of this, for the first 3 bars of this piece, it's the A that we're repeating all the way along the top. And we're just interspersing that with other notes. So the D, and then an E, A repeating, and then back down to D. to end, which is of course a fifth, but you're not likely to notice that as being a fifth. You're more likely at that end of that piece to kind of just recognize that that is a D at the end, that you're finishing on a D. And it's a good idea always before you start playing anything to actually look at the last bar and see, well, what am I finishing on? It'll give you a good strong finish. So we've got a fifth, a fourth, a repeated note, back to our tonic. In the right hand, we see that our starting note is A and we finish on D. So it makes sense to have that as our hand position. That allows us to take in all the notes in between. There's nothing higher than A or lower than D, so that's fine. We can stay there. Same thing in the left hand. We're going from the D to the A and some notes in between, but that covers pretty much everything. We're told that this is a march, so not too slow. It needs to have some energy. If possible. Of course, in an exam situation, it's fine to play it a bit slower, but you don't want it to drag either. If you're going for a distinction, then you would need to have the tempo matching a march. Dynamics are a bit more interesting in this one. We start with mezzo forte, we have a crescendo up to forte, and then a decrescendo back to piano. So that takes a little bit of skill. That is also something very much to make sure that you've got plenty of practice in doing. And in terms of the articulation, again, there's some interest in this, is that the first half of it has lots of staccato notes and the second half is more legato. Our third example is a grade 4 level, and immediately see it's much more complex looking. We're in 6/8 time. And we're in the key of C minor, so we've got lots to think about in this one. So the first thing, of course, that we're going to look at is a rhythm, and immediately we can see that there's a rhythmic feature in it that reappears multiple times, where we have this long, short, long pattern, so that kind of goes. In 6/8 time, you're counting 6/8 notes to a bar. So at this level, because it's more complex, it may be more comfortable to use counting rather than rhythm language. So you're counting 6 beats in a bar, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And that rhythm at the beginning, that you see, that dotted rhythm, you want to make sure that you're playing that precisely. That happens in many places. Left hand has it as well. So it's sort of a long, short, long. And we would count that as 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so whenever you see that, it comes in at the beginning of a bar in every place that it does appear. So you can count, in this case, you would be able to count it 1, 2, and 3. Of course, if it came in somewhere else, you could be counting 2, 3, and 4, or 4, 5, and 6, or whatever suits it. So it's a rhythm that you would want to be familiar with, and you'd need to be comfortable playing things in 6/8 time as well. So if you're coming up to a grade 3 or grade 4, and this isn't something that you've spent much time on, just be aware it is, if you're doing sight reading for an exam, that it is a time signature that could come up for you. So you'd want to be fairly comfortable with it. Again, you're going to tap it out in a couple of places. Just you're scanning the music, you're noticing, okay, this is the exact same pattern is happening in multiple places. So I'm just going to tap it out a couple of times to just get a sense of it. 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I've got a sense of it now in the different bars that it appears in. Our key signature has 3 flats, so that's going to keep us busy. If you get a chance, if you feel like you have time, or if you're just doing this in your own time and you're not under any time constraint, you could play the associated scale. So in this case, it would be a C minor scale. Or you could also just notice where the 3 flats are. So we've got a B flat, an E flat, and an A flat. So just be aware that those are there. And then we scan the piece and look for any accidentals. We can see a B natural there in the 4th bar. I don't see any others, so we need to keep those 3 flats in mind, and they do come up quite a bit throughout this. So this is one where we really need to keep our key signature firmly in mind. Now looking at the shape of it, the first thing that we notice is these thirds that are happening, first of all in the left hand. And then we also have them in the right hand. At the end of the piece we also have a chord. And in the left hand in the final bar we have a descending minor arpeggio. So again, it's always a good idea to look at the last bar and see how we're going to finish up. In the rest of the music there's a lot of repeated notes. G. So we want to make sure that we don't miss any of those. We have the same thing in the left hand. That can be quite confusing when you're trying to scan through a piece of music or play it and figure it out as you go along. It's easy to miss some of those repeated notes, so keep an eye on those. The rest of it moves more or less by step, stepping down. Here we have a jump up to the A flat, so that might be a place you might want to spot that. Okay, where am I going to? I've landed on this D, where am I headed to? It's the A flat. That's a place where you might, if you're not careful, play an A natural. Just be careful of the key signature. And you can see then that that's just coming down by thirds. And in the left hand there in bar 4, that's the first note in bar 4 is one that you might want to identify in advance and just notice what's happening there. So we're starting on a G, then we're coming up to the C. That it is an interval of a fourth, but because C is so easily recognized, you probably won't need to identify the interval. And in the second line there between bars 6 and 7, we finish on a C and then we're coming down to a G here and then stepping down and a jump up there to the C and E flat. So those notes that are above middle C can be a little bit confusing sometimes, so just keep grounded by knowing where middle C is. So it's the bottom of those two notes there and we're coming down from there. We're not really told anything very much about the tempo of this piece, but we're told that it's lilting, so that would suggest a sort of a rocking feel, so probably not too fast. And we have quite a lot of dynamics to think about as well. Mezzo forte, a decrescendo down to piano, back to mezzo forte and finishing forte, so with a crescendo at the end. So a lot of shaping if we can get that in. In terms of the articulation, mostly legato, but we've got rests in between. In the left hand, between those thirds in the left hand. So if you were playing this, to not hold on to them for too long. We don't want to we want to leave a gap in between. And so putting it all together. So now you know what to do. It's time to start applying it as often as possible. The more sight reading you do, the better you get, and there's really no mystery. Hit the like button if this was useful to you, and I'll see you next time. In the meantime, happy practicing.